So welcome to the CANOVI carrot variety trial results and breeding update webinar. We'll get started. Before we get into the particulars of carrot cultivars, I'd like to start by acknowledging the longer than long-standing relationships of Indigenous peoples to all the places we call home, plant seeds, and harvest food. We acknowledge these lands as ancestral and unceded Indigenous territories. We acknowledge the tension inherent in our presence here as descendants of settlers, and also the possibilities that exist for accountability, healing, creativity, and justice. So I invite all of you to revisit the whos.land or native-land.ca websites and maybe dig deeper from there to learn more about the history of the land with which you're in relationship right now. So we'll get going. I'm happy to be here today to share with you what this season's orange and red carrot trials have showed us, and then to update you on a few of the carrot breeding projects we have going on. I'm Solveig Hansen. I'm the project coordinator for this project. I'm at UBC, University of British Columbia, here in Vancouver, snowy, slushy Vancouver today. So originally, the goal of these trials was to test the CANOVI orange and red populations that we've been developing for some time alongside commercial hybrid and open pollinated cultivars to see how ready they are for commercialization. However, we and most of you found out pretty quickly that we had a germination issue with both populations due to some thrips, a lot of thrips in our greenhouse seed production that resulted in almost no germination on the red population and roughly 30% on the orange population. So our adjusted goal became to compare the commercial cultivars that we were trialing, the hybrids and open pollinated varieties, to see if we can detect any patterns of performance by region or identify any open pollinated varieties that were competitive on some or all farms with the hybrids. There were several components to this year's trial. First were the on-farm trials that many of you participated in. We trialed 5 orange varieties, 6 red. We asked you to plant a 12-foot plot for each variety. About 30 participants evaluated both orange and red carrots using the Seed-Linked app, and you submitted ratings on a 1 to 5 scale for traits like germination, vigor, appearance, yield. Roughly a third of you also submitted quantitative data on yield and some notes on maturity and marketability. So that is what you see. Oh, I haven't debuted my pointer. I made my pointer bigger and outlined in orange, so it kind of looks like a carrot. I hope that brings you a little joy. It's bringing me joy. Okay, to supplement that information, we did some replicated trials on the UBC Farm Hub site. We wanted to trial a few more orange cultivars to get an initial look at them. And then we also used 2 harvest dates. We did a 74-day harvest, which is in line with the published maturity dates of most of these varieties. And then a later one, about 3 weeks later, just to get some kind of gauge for how well they held in the field. Although it's only on 1 farm, so it's only a suggestion. The orange carrot trial included 5 varieties. So 2 hybrids, which including Bolero, which is the one to beat, really since its introduction in 1989. It's been a real workhorse for many, many growers. 2 open pollinated varieties. Touchon Deluxe is a favorite of one of our participatory breeding carrot growers in BC. That seed was both grown and selected in BC by the BC Eco Seed Co-op. And then Dulcinea is a variety selected and the seed grown by Fruition Seeds in Western New York. So 1 OP from each broad region of the country, and then CANOVI orange. I will present the trial results in a few different formats. So directly from Seed-Linked, I will share these pie charts showing the percentage of participants who would grow the variety again. I'll also share some photos that some of you have added to Seed-Linked and some comments. I encourage you, we'll drop the links to the trial results in the chat. Please go ahead and scroll through them. The gallery for looking at photos is pretty smooth at this point, so it's kind of fun to see what the same variety looked like on a bunch of different farms. I also did statistical analysis on the trial results to help us understand how probable it is that the difference in trial ratings we're seeing is real or due to an actual difference in the varieties rather than just being an artifact of random variability. So I'll walk through some bar charts and heat maps, but in general, the thing to remember is the more bling, the more stars you see, the more sure we are that the difference we're seeing between varieties is due to a real difference. So we'll start with orange carrots, all the types of data we've talked about, and then we'll take a pause for questions before we move on to red carrots and the breeding projects. So this is where carrot trialers were located this year. The carrot trialers are the orange flags. So the participants were distributed over all 5 of the Bauta regions, with higher concentrations in BC and Ontario. When I looked for regional differences in the data, I first tried to divide growers by hardiness zones. So basically the length of your frost-free season. I saw a few environmental effects pop up, but very small. And then I thought, well, why don't I just try dividing by east and west? And then I saw a lot of environmental effects show up. So that's the analysis I'm going to share today, because it seemed to get at some more of these differences. Okay, so getting into the data. To orient you, these stars indicate that there's a significant difference among varieties. And then by looking at the heat map, you can see the averages for each variety and each trait. Green is high scores, red are low scores. The heat map helps you see that a lot of these traits travel together, or the productivity traits. So germination, canopy cover, and vigor and yield tended to travel together. In this particular set, the variety rank doesn't change for these traits. So they go in the same order. We'll check out a few more bar plots to see more detail. There are some weak effects for marketability and uniformity. For those quality traits, the difference was between CANOVI orange and several or all of the commercial varieties. So, and there were no significant differences between the commercial varieties. So I won't go into a lot more detail there. We saw no significant difference in appearance or flavor. And I thought that was interesting as somebody who, like many of you, tasted all the carrots and did find differences in flavor, although perhaps more subtle than the 1 through 5 ranking system can pick up. When we look at variation by environment, we see some smaller effects, but for almost every trait except appearance. All of the trait ratings, average trait ratings, are higher in Western Canada, including those with significant differences. We saw the same variety ranking in both regions. So the Bolero still came out on top, closely followed by Naval, the other hybrid, and Touchon Deluxe. There's some more nuance here that we'll dig into in the next few slides. So then followed by the 2 commercial OPs, Touchon and Dulcinea, and then good old CANOVI orange that really did its best with the unfortunate seed that was produced last year. Interestingly, I found no genotype by environment variation for any trait. So that means there weren't any cases of a certain variety doing significantly worse or better in one region than the other. That's one of the major things we're looking for in trials like this. We just have to also note that the environmental variable I'm using, east and west, is a very broad brush, right? So there are a lot of ways that environments varied at each of your specific farms that we didn't measure, and that if we did, we might be able to pick up on which environmental characteristics were responsible or associated with these differences in traits. So that's something that we will explore further, hopefully in future trials. To take you briefly through the growing season data style, we'll dig into the difference we first saw in germination. So there's a general pattern over all of these traits that there's less variation among varieties in the east than in the west. You can kind of see this region effect. The mean germination is about 0.5 point lower in the east than the west. Bolero, which is this dark bar that you'll see on all the bar charts, is the highest in both regions. In both regions, these 3 varieties, Dulcinea, Naval, and Touchon, are not significantly different than one another. So they kind of travel as a group. And then poor CANOVI orange was significantly worse for germination, as we talked about. In the mid-season, we looked at canopy cover and vigor. We'll look at canopy cover here. Again, you'll see more spread in the data in the west than the east. In the east, there's no significant difference between any of the commercial cultivars, although numerically the hybrids are slightly higher. In the west, there was no significant difference between Bolero, Naval, and Tucson. And in both regions, CANOVI orange was significantly worse than everything. Just want to note that it makes sense for canopy cover to be highly correlated to germination, right? So if newer plants come up, their tops will cover the soil less well. Then these traits also carry through to yield, of course, because fewer roots make a lower yield. So there's a similar, you see the pattern emerging in the graphs, right? In both the east and the west, there's no significant difference between any of the commercial varieties, although there are higher mean ratings in the west. And then CANOVI was significantly worse in the west, and worse than all except Dulcinea in the east. So this invites a question: is yield simply a function of germination? And I will posit that certainly germination is foundational to yield. But I know that I observed a difference in canopy cover, in top growth, in vigor, and I think a lot of you did as well, that was independent of germination. So, but in this trial, definitely yield ratings correlated very highly with germination and canopy cover. So the seed link ratings gave us an idea of relative yield, but thanks to those of you who recorded quantitative data, we also have information on actual yield. So you can note a very similar marketable percentage among all of these varieties. And interestingly, Naval, not Bolero, had the highest average marketable yield for these 13 participants. It was interesting to me that in the seedling data, we saw no significant difference in flavor by either variety or region, but a few tasting events fleshed out our understanding of carrot flavor. So at the UBC Farm Fall Fair, we had about 60 people try, I think, 6 varieties of carrots, 3 of which were red, and 3 of which were orange. And all of them were rated almost identically for sweetness and liking. So this, we might interpret that even though we as growers were paying a lot of attention to how this carrot differs in flavor from this next one, everyday consumers are really happy to eat a sweet orange carrot, and they may not be paying attention to the nuance that we are. We also had an opportunity at the University of Toronto to look at genotype by environment interaction at a very rough level for carrot flavor. So I flew out to University of Toronto, Scarborough, with my suitcase half full of carrots. And we tried the same 5 varieties that were grown at UBC and UTSC. In that tasting, Bolero was the most liked from both production sites, but we did detect some genotype by environment interaction, or a suggestion thereof. So Dulcinea was liked better when it was grown at UBC than UTSC. CANOVI orange was the opposite. It was liked better when it was grown at UTSC than UBC. And also in general, everything was liked better when it was grown in the West. I'm gonna guess, or when it was grown at UBC Farm, I'm gonna guess that's a function of really consistent irrigation and also less extreme temperatures. We just didn't get real high heat this summer here. So now we're going to move into these kind of variety description slides, or I think of them as kind of dossiers, like this is what we have on this variety. You will see English on the left, French on the right, so please orient yourself as is helpful. And then these photos in the middle are from participants. And then we have the pie chart that represents how many growers said they would like to grow that variety again. So Bolero certainly shows up as the one to beat, a serendipitous genetic combination ever since its introduction these many years ago. And except for people who noted slug problems, fertility or edge effect problems in their plots, rodent predation very positive comments. This is a representative comment from a grower here in BC. I will note that at the UBC farm, Bolero held very well. For its official days to maturity is 75 days, and that's where our first harvest was. But this is how it looked right here at 95 days. So it held very well. Naval was the next in line. You'll see just slightly fewer votes for liking to grow it again. In the east, it was not significantly different than Bolero for any trait. In the west, it was very similar except for germination. Again, highest yield among the folks who recorded supplementary data. And comments were generally positive, especially regarding flavor, noting slimmer roots that were good for bunching, as this comment gets at. Touchon Deluxe, notably, among the two OP varieties in the trial, was better germinating, more vigorous, and higher yielding. And it was not significantly different than Bolero or Naval for any trait in the east, and any trait except vigor in the west. So we do see, real variation in how it does on farms, but where it works, it seems to really work. At UBC Farm, it really shone. It was sweet, crisp, succulent flavor at both early and late harvest dates. And it was the highest yield at our second harvest date. We do see the shape variability that's evident in the photos. So several growers said, this was a really stumpy, short carrot. It tasted great, but this isn't a marketable shape. And for some growers, it really elongated quite nicely. Flavor ratings were also highly variable, ranging from a water nothing flavor noted by a grower in Ontario to others saying it was the sweetest and tastiest in the trial. So it's definitely variable on several of these traits based on conditions. So if it works where you are, it really works. That's wonderful. Dulcinea showed slightly, as we saw in the graphs, slightly lower ratings for some of the productivity traits. But still in the east, where it was bred, it was not significantly different than Bolero, Naval, or Touchon for any trait. Lots of folks like these. Some noted germination issues and slower top growth, but eventually good top size. So a little slower to start, but then catch up and do fine. And Michael Silver in BC noted, kind of quantified that, like these take one more cultivation because they're a little slower to get going. But a really high quality, good tasting carrot. And then Dear CANOVI Orange, obviously the germination issues that we talked about. So it was rated lower for all the productivity traits, which were an extension of those issues in germination. It did do fairly well in the east for quality traits. We'll leave that there. So lower yield, we certainly saw better quality at our early harvest than our late harvest at UBC. So if I were to put a maturity date on this, I would say roughly 75 days. I would say it really fits in that early harvest rather than something that will hold well late into the season, but that obviously we should test that with a more robust population. And we'll talk in the breeding section about strategies to reconstitute this population and hopefully still make something good out of it, because there's something good here. We've got good tasting carrots, dark orange. There's something to work with. Okay, so at our trials on the UBC farm, we trialed several varieties more than were in the on-farm trials. And a few to draw your attention to are two from our friends at the Organic Seed Alliance. The CIOA is the Carrot Improvement for Organic Agriculture project, which they've been working on for 8 years, selecting open pollinated varieties for organic agriculture. So we wanted to take a look at a couple of these. And in our early harvest, this orange flavor select really stood out. It was absolutely delicious, very high yielding. That would be one that I would love to see get out to more of your farms and see how it did there. Their orange strain cross also has awesome flavor, slightly less productive. A couple others to look at could be some open pollinated varieties from sativa, which are available through high mowing organic seeds. So Dulciva performs similarly to Bolero in the first harvest. Yes, in the first harvest. And then this Bolin, which is a new one that may be out this season or maybe coming, was in the middle of the pack at the early harvest, but doing quite well in our number 3 place in the late harvest. So those are a couple of things to keep on our radar for future carrot trials. So we'll take a pause. I see there's some things in the chat. Yeah, any questions either by voice or in the chat before we roll on to red carrots?
Maybe while people are coming up with their questions, maybe Sylvia, you can help maybe add some more info to this question. John asked if Bolero was developed in or for like what we're calling like the east and west of Canada, and then Rebecca answered that it was developed by a breeder, a French multinational seed company, and we're not sure. Just wondering if you had any other info around that.
I mean, it was bred by Vilmorin, by one or several breeders there. It like many hybrids is bred to be widely adapted. So it was almost certainly trialed worldwide, or perhaps focused on Europe and the US, so North America, but they want to reach as large an audience as possible and have these varieties be as stable on as many farms as possible. And Bolero really seems to have fit that bill. So it's a widely adapted variety, bred to do well in as many places as possible. Any other questions? I can certainly roll on. These are photos of our carrot selection last year. This is Judith. She's been a worker on a project for, well, since April of last year, and she's gonna get her master's like next week, and she'll move on to bigger and better things, but she's been amazing help. Okay, hearing nothing, oh, I got a hand, yes, John.
Yeah, could you say how you plan to scout for or get rid of the thrip problem that occurred?
Yeah. So the issue last year was there was an experiment on roses on the bench next to ours that was really acting as a host. The greenhouse folks were using biological materials, tiny insects to attempt to deal with the thrip problem. But it was too little too late and very hard to monitor within the cages, like within the pollination cages where we had flies flying around. So I've talked with her, and this year, we requested that no likely thrip hosts, because we know that thrips like carrots, right? So we need to have nothing else in the greenhouse that will also be a very attractive host. And she agreed. The only other thing in that greenhouse will be poplar trees. And I think that'll take care of a lot of it. She's also going to pre-treat with the biological treatments, from the beginning of the season, not waiting to see a rise in thrip population. Every other year we've done seed production in this greenhouse, it's gone fine. I really think it was the rose issue that gave us problems, but it's definitely on their radar. And I actually, maybe this is a good time to say this. I'll be moving on to a different position. I'll be working at a cover crop breeding lab at Cornell University in Ithaca, starting in January. So we are currently looking for another postdoc to fill this project's shoes. And so that's in progress. So seed production this winter will be in the hands of Chris, who's right here asking a question.
And do you think that the 30% germ that you did have represents some resilience against thrips, or it was just incidental?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, gosh, I wanted, there was certainly selection for some kind of appeal to thrips. I did hear from our friends at OSA who also had thrip problems in their outdoor cages this summer, that they were seeing much worse effects in the red than the orange populations. So perhaps there's something biochemically going on there, that you know, some compound present in at least some of the orange carrots that's repellent to thrips, but I'm really just hypothesizing. I'll talk more when we talk about carrot breeding. I'll talk about our strategies for bringing back the orange population. Good questions, thank you. Okay, shall we go for it? All right. So the red carrot trial included 6 varieties. As you know, almost no germ on CANOVI red. So I've excluded it from most of the analysis. But we did get to compare 2 hybrid red carrot varieties from Bayo Seeds with 2 open pollinated red varieties from Organic Seed Alliance. That's the carnelian, which is newly available through High Mowing Organic Seeds, and this are 6620, which I think is maybe supposed to be 6220, which is not yet commercially available. So in this trial, when I refer to commercial varieties, it's these named varieties here. So everything except our 6620. We evaluated the same traits as in the orange carrot trial with the addition of bolt resistance because we'd seen that be an issue for red carrots. We found significant differences among varieties in almost identical traits as with orange carrots. So the productivity traits, germination, canopy cover, vigor, and yield saw those same significant differences among varieties. In this case, the ranking of traits is not the same for all those varieties. So the heat map I've sorted by yield, but you'll see that not all of those traits follow in exactly the same order. Again, there's no significant difference in flavor, which again is surprising to me, but you can note that the average scores for flavor are lower than for the red carrots, around 3, which in our rubric meant I would eat it again, but I wouldn't seek it out, versus closer to a 4 of would happily eat again for the orange carrots. I'll also say that red carrots are really, they've been bred over hundreds of years to be eaten cooked. So we're not really seeing them in their, I guess their focus use or the use they were bred for when we eat them raw. More about that later. We found a few environmental effects in the red carrot data using east and west regions, fewer than in the orange carrot data. Only saw 1 very weak environmental effect using hardiness zone groups. Again, no genotype by environment interaction, so no cases of a variety doing significantly better in one region than the other. For the traits where we did see regional variation, the germination and marketability were slightly higher in the west. Bolt resistance was quite a bit better for eastern growers, which I'll hypothesize is a function of the lower latitudes of most of those growers. So the ranking we see is generally Dragon at the top, Red Sun and Ruby Pack, which actually take different orders in the different regions than Carnelian and our 6220. Dragon isn't a true red carrot. We'll talk about that later. Let's take a tour through the season with some data. In our germination data, we see the moderate region effect with average germination slightly lower in the east. The variety effect is similar but not identical in the east and the west. In the west, this experimental variety from Organic Seed Alliance had significantly less germ than everything else. In the east, it wasn't significantly different than Carnelian or the hybrid Ruby Pack. But as you can see, the general pattern or ranking for germination held in both regions. For canopy cover, which again follows germination, in both the east and the west, the Dragon showed significantly more canopy cover than our 6620. So that's the significant difference that's driving a lot of these that's making us note significance when we do statistical analysis. You'll note that in this trial, Dragon, which is this dark gray bar, takes the role that Bolero had in the previous trial we looked at. So it has the highest average for all of the traits that we measured. But again, it's an orange carrot with purple or like anthocyanin on the outside. So it's a colored carrot. If what you're looking for is a colored carrot to diversify your market offering, it might fit the bill. If you're really looking for a red carrot, it's not quite that. In the East, we saw that Dragon didn't have significantly different canopy cover than any other of the commercial varieties. So this group here. In the West, Dragon showed significantly more canopy cover than both of the truly red OPs, so Carnelian and 6620. You'll see the commercial varieties grouped together for a lot of these traits, which to me says there's a certain bar that commercial varieties tend to have to clear before they're deemed to be good enough to be sold and relied upon by growers. Looking at the end of the season, yield in both regions, Dragon showed the highest yield and our 6620 showed the lowest. In the West, that 6220 also showed significantly less yield than Red Sun and Ruby Pack, which are the other hybrids. When we look at quantitative data, marketable yield is in the 4-pound range versus about 7 pounds for the orange varieties. It's slightly, but not drastically lower marketable yield than for orange varieties. You note that Carnelian showed very similar actual yield, both marketable and total, to Red Sun and Ruby Pack. So that's consistent with the lack of significant difference in the seed-link data. Looking at flavor, again, we saw that all 3 varieties that we tasted out at the UBC farm tasting got really similar scores. People just seemed to be happy to eat carrots that day, and we're not particularly discerning, even though we were, yeah. So that's actually valuable information. Like, people want good crunchy, relatively sweet carrots without harsh flavor. But everyday consumers might not be too much more discerning. In our tasting at University of Toronto, where we had carrots grown at 2 sites, we did see some, again, G by E or genotype by environment differences. About 2/3 of the tasters wanted to eat Ruby Pack again, whichever place it was grown. About 2/3 of the tasters would eat Carnelian again when it was grown at UBC, but only about 1/3 when grown at UTSC. So this suggests that this and our orange results suggest that maybe hybrids have more stable flavor over, which amounts to sugar accumulation and accumulation of these various terpenoids that give aromas to carrots over multiple locations. And maybe they're more variable in open pollinated varieties, but we'd need a much more robust study to back that up with facts. So on to the variety dossiers. Dragon, like we said, is really was the most vigorous carrot in this trial. Germinated right away, big healthy tops, yielded really well. At UBC Farm, it was absolutely our leader at 74 days. It tasted juicy and sweet. I was like going to sing the praises of this carrot everywhere I went. It did much worse at the later harvest. It really wants to be harvested early. And then I also got to try it in several places when I got to visit, when I went out to Ontario, and boy, did it taste different. The flesh was much denser. We could almost peel the cortex off the core of the carrot. And there were a lot more stronger flavors. I think that probably has to do with moisture, high heat, maybe soil type, but I was surprised at that variability. So, but between the 2 trials, I would draw a parallel between Dragon and Touchon Deluxe. Like, where it works, it's awesome. And your conditions aren't right for it, it may not work. So this is the first of the hybrid true red carrots from Bijou seeds. This does contain a few light colored off types, which we see in that photo, which they note on the website when you buy it, so everybody can expect it. It has a lighter color than Ruby Pack. Ruby Pack is meant to be its replacement. It does have beautiful pink color throughout the root that, like Alex noted here. Another grower noted visually it could work, they just don't like the flavor. So, right, it depends on what your customers are going to use these for. And again, no significant differences in any trait that we rated on SeedLinked from Ruby Pack, which is the other hybrid, or Dragon. Then Ruby Pack, which is the new replacement for Red Sun from Bijou, has a darker color. For us, it had a rougher appearance at our early harvest, and a couple other folks noted that. There was a lot of variability in the comments, which is why I chose to put 2 up that really represented each poll. Like, this one was awesome versus yeah, we just didn't get a lot of roots that looked very good. When we looked at our harvest taken early and late, the yield caught up to Red Sun at the late harvest, but in the early harvest, it was lower. Carnelian. So this is a new choice, commercially available this year for the first time, bred by Organic Seed Alliance, offered by High Mowing Organic Seeds, and it was the better of the 2 open pollinated varieties we trialed, which is likely why it got picked up for commercial production. So it's great to have an OP option. And notably, it was not different from Red Sun or Ruby Pack for any trait that we rated on SeedLinked. And you saw that the marketable and total yields were fairly similar. So if you're looking for a red carrot and you would rather use an open pollinated, this is a great one to try. We did see that it did better later in the season. So it might not be something you want to plan on for your 75-day harvest slot, but something to leave for the 90 to 100-day harvest. And then this R6220 experimental. So we saw that it was rated lower than many varieties for many traits. So just generally less vigorous. It's an experimental, so it didn't have a maturity date attached. We saw it did fairly poorly at our first harvest, but at our 95-day harvest, it had the highest yield of anything that we grew. So, you know, this one I think is going to take some more breeding effort from the folks at OSA, but it could be a nice later season red nonce. It really does have more of the nonce shape. You can see that blunting. It has more of that than the carnelian does, but a carnelian is a little more tapered. For our hub site data, we grew the same five varieties plus Fantasia, which is the beautiful multicolored population that you all got as a sample. And I'd love to hear about what you thought of it, if any of you are saving roots to make seed on, etc. Our varieties, when we rank them by, how did I rank this? By marketable yield. Were rated as the same overall, in the same order as the overall data at the 74-day harvest. Things really changed at our 95-day harvest there, where we saw 6620 or 6220. I have to find the right name for that variety. We saw that do much better. So the OSA open pollinated varieties really did well later in the season. So that's something to note. They could even fill a slot after the Red Sun or Ruby Pack if you want to stagger plantings. So questions about red carrots. I see there's some things in the chat. Okay, the vampire carrot. Is that a true red carrot or is it an orange carrot with purple, like dragon. I'm not familiar with that one. Orange with red skin. Oh, interesting. Okay, I think that one was trialed in some earlier CANOVI trials before I got here. And I won't even say, I'm not sure if I looked for orange with red skin. Okay, yes, David. In the red CANOVI trial last year. Maybe the previous year. John's going to plan to grow Fantasia next year. Yeah, Fantasia really, I loved the flavor. Even later in the season, I think I'm so glad some of you are saving roots. Yeah, I will get that feedback back to OSA. They really do have something special on their hands. And I'm really curious about how the color distribution will evolve and develop in different populations as people either save out their favorite colors or try to keep a balance of colors in there. Alex said we had a few students at KPU who are very vocal fans of R4286. Which one was that? Even though it didn't get the top score overall at our site.
Sorry, I'm getting the name wrong because I can't remember the numbers, but that.
Oh, the 6220.
Thank you.
Oh, great.
Whatever. There's a 6 in there. And a 2.
Yeah, there's a 6 and a 2, definitely.
The students who liked it really liked it.
I love it. And they liked eating it raw or as something grown in the field.
They liked the flavor, both fresh and storage flavor.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's the comment that I picked out for that one. Like it was really not vigorous, but kind of cool flavor. Ooh, cool. Are there more seeds for Fantasia? Qualified, yes, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to keep interrupting.
No.
We just at KP, so for everyone that doesn't know, I work at KP at Kwantlen Polytechnic University now. And we grew a larger amount of Fantasia. I had more seeds. We did a large block thinking maybe we'll keep saving seed or do selection or something. And we just looked at all the stecklings yesterday. We just kind of did the selection, and really we just did some like roguing. We didn't try to do any selection in any direction. We just rogued out that were split or knobby. And we've got 300 stecklings, and we're thinking to just grow the seed next year just to practice with carrot seed production. So
amazing.
I need to talk to OSA about what their what their desires are around sharing and how they want that to be handled. But we potentially will have some seed.
That's very cool. From my conversations with, so Alex was the postdoc who did the first 3 years of this project after I came on. So it's great to have you here. In my conversations with the breeders at OSA, they would love to keep track of where the seed's going so they can see what directions people take it in, but they're very happy. Like it's meant to be an open source variety for people to take and play with and just really enjoy. I don't know about the quantity of seed they have available. I can check on that. Tiara, if you would take a note on that, I would really appreciate that. And David also says, yeah, we would like to keep track of growers also who are saving seed from Fantasia. Maybe that's a question on a survey coming up. That would have been a great question for the exit survey, and we didn't think of it. And I'm newer to this area, so I don't know sunshine seeds, but it sounds like there was another either segregating population or formula mix that was pretty awesome. Okay, great, in Kelowna.
Well, in that case, if people tentatively, we can be a source of seed for Fantasia for people here who want it. We're happy to share the seed that we grow. Nice. We'll just talk to OSA about it and let them know who we're sharing it with. Provided we get a good seed crop next year to jinx it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm talking with Nikhila next week, so we'll chat about this too. Yeah. That makes me really happy. I was so jazzed when I got to try it last spring, and we didn't have necessarily a plan when we gave it to you all, except to hope that people were excited and wanted to do more with it.
Yeah, we were blown away by the flavor in addition to the color.
Absolutely, me too. All right. Any more questions? Or we have a few slides on the breeding projects that we have in progress. Okay. So the orange carrot breeding project that, well, Alex started back in 2018, started with selecting 4 parents. These are examples of the 4 parents that we grew this year. So you can see that we've made, well, when we show you the next slides, you'll see that we've made some progress in terms of combining dark orange color and this nonce shape. This is Rumba with the nonce shape. This has nice dark color, but unfortunately really rough appearance this year. After selecting the parents, selecting the parents in 2018, there were 2 years of mass selection, which just means growing the whole population, selecting individuals. So 2 cycles of that. Then last year we did these family selections where we harvested seed from each plant separately, looked at it separately, and then first selected among the families, and then within the families, the best individuals from the best families, and then recombined that into our population that was decimated by thrips. But there is a way forward. My mouse does not want to take us forward. Why is that happening? There we go. Okay. So, as you know, we had germination issues this year, but we put in twice as many row feet as we normally would have in a couple of different plantings. These are roots from the later harvest. So this is at 88 days when we harvested these. From this population, we tasted everything, also selected for shape. These up here are some of our selected roots. The ones on the bottom we excluded for reasons of shape, basically. And then the ones in the middle that we turned sideways are ones that one or more of us thought tasted funny or weren't something we wanted to eat again. So we ended up saving 74 roots, which is, if all of them survive, enough to make a pollination cage. So it'll be 5th generation seed in the greenhouse this winter. But we also have seed saved from last year when we did the family selections. So we'll plant out seed from the families that we selected, so the good families. So then next summer, we'll have both roots from the new seed population and roots from the good families, or the ones that we selected a couple of years ago. And we can select from both of those to try to carry forward both genetic diversity and the traits that we want in this orange nonce population. We also had a serendipitous discovery in the CANOVI orange population last year, in that a couple of the families, or several of them, had occasional yellow roots. I call them glassy yellows. And we got curious about how many of these would pop up if we started crossing some of these individuals. So we made some biparental crosses of orange roots from families that had yellow roots showing up. And we got some of them that looked like this, that had a pretty even distribution of these kind of golden yellow carrots and orange carrots. And I thought they were beautiful, especially when you can get them to like twine together like that. That's amazing. So we took 115 roots. So this top row is our selections from these families. We had 3 reciprocal crosses, meaning that we took roots from both seed parents of each cross. And those were derived from 2 of the families from the CANOVI orange population. So I'm very curious to see how this will develop in terms of both color assortment and just general vigor. I don't know if the genetic base is too narrow or not, but we'll find out. We've got enough roots to save to make a population in the greenhouse. And this was also extremely delicious. Like, these were crisp, succulent, juicy. Yeah, some of the best tasting carrots I've had. And I'm finishing the last ones from our October 3rd harvest, like right now. So they hold well and still taste good after 2 months. The CANOVI red population was started back in 2020 in response to farmers observing a high rate of bolting and red carrots in these latitudes. So in 2020, Chris, who's right here, identified some promising parents down in El Centro at Phil Simon's breeding nursery. He's our collaborating carrot breeder from the University of Wisconsin. So right before the pandemic, Chris selected these parents. They were grown from seed in that summer, and then the first mass pollination was made that winter. So it's had a couple generations of recombining. Obviously, all of us had very poor luck in the field this summer, except for David, who I think did an amazing seed cleaning job on the CANOVI red seed and managed to winnow out the few plump seeds and plant them. And when he harvested just earlier this week, before the snowstorm that we got, we have plantable stecklings. Like, they're not big, but they are well filled out, and I think they'll store well for the rest of the season until it's time to plant them. And it is worth a try. So here they are going into refrigeration, and we'll try those in the greenhouse this winter to make seed. So this is to say, hooray for having many people in many locations working on this project. This is the kind of functional redundancy that we are building into this seed network. That means when things mess up at a lot of places, they still, I think, have gone right at one place. We can also plant seed that we've saved from previous years of this population, as we're doing with the orange population, so that next year's selection can happen from both, to protect against any genetic bottlenecking we got from this thrips issue, because it could be that this great seed was from only a few plants, and that could be problematic down the road. Then last year, we identified this really cool inbred. It was suggested by Phil, our plant breeding collaborator. We trialed it. It had almost no carrot rust fly damage in plots where we saw a lot of damage on other varieties. So we thought, what would happen if we cross this by some CANOVI orange individuals? Maybe we'll get something interesting. We did get something that looks interesting. Like, I think these colors are really kind of cool. These are a little over mature. We could have harvested these about 3 weeks earlier, I think. The flavor is good. It's mild, it's rich, it's a little more starchy than some of the juicy sweet ones, but it's really acceptable. It's not rust fly resistant. Unfortunately, that trait seemed to stay with the parent. So there are a few strategies we could try. We could try crossing some of these individuals back to the other parent. We could make some small masses. We saved 37 roots. There just weren't enough families that looked interesting to make enough for a greenhouse cage, but we could make some small masses, some biparental crosses. If some of you are interested, we could send you the roots and you can do what you like with them. But that was an interesting investigation or experiment. So thank you so much for coming today, for growing these trials out, for submitting data. It's been really a pleasure to work with you, and I'm sure the farmers in Western New York are going to be equally awesome, but you guys set a high bar for being just friendly and insightful, and for following through on it's a substantial commitment to grow a trial and get the data back and even show up for something like this. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, now we'll do questions.
Hey, so can you, I was under the impression, or I was hoping, that the Fantasia seed was actually commercially available, that I was going to be able to purchase. Is that not the case?
That is not the case, unfortunately. It's still, it's still an experimental state, but I gotta believe it's moving toward commercialization, and also they're very free with sharing seed. So it's, probably not enough quantity for you to just grow a population to sell right away, but it's there.
So wait, do you know, regarding that following on that last question, do you know if OSA has like a policy or protocol around people selling that variety at farmers markets? Like,
That's a great
you know, as
question.
they're encouraging people to share it, are they expecting people
Right.
to just use their roots for seed production, or can farmers be actually taking this to market?
That's a great question, and I will clarify that with Michaela at OSA.
Okay,
I think
great.
I think kind of in keeping with the open source seed initiative agreement, it's like identify the variety as what it is. But they want people to this. That's why they bred it. They want it to be for, you know, diversified farmers to supply local food systems. And so I think they'd be super happy. I'm not sure if they thought that far.
Okay.
I'll find out. Maybe they have. We haven't talked about it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's part of a public breeding project. So I don't think they're looking for any kind of royalties or material transfer agreements or any of that stuff that sometimes comes into play. All right, how are we doing for time? Oh my gosh, right at an hour. All right, well, I will stop sharing and hope you all have an awesome holiday season with intentionally moderated commitments and a lot of great connections.